What's up folks, CrossFlux here with my Week 3 deck profile for the Sparkman Yugitube Dueling Tourney. This week, I'm up against Demurer Tundra, so you know it's going to be a tough fight. But, I'm up to the challenge. I plan on turning things around this time with a more consistent strategy, so that I don't end up on a losing streak. So, what are we playing for today? Well, there's trouble afoot. What time is it? It's Morphin time! Soaring Pegasus! That's right. In order to serve justice, I must call upon the power of the Morphin Grid. This means I'm rocking Super Quant cards. This is a difficult archetype to make the most of, since they're full of different attributes and types. They really need a smaller engine to help them cohesively stick together. In the past, I've tried a volcanic engine to add a little draw power, plus board wiping potential, but it was pretty bricky, counterintuitive to the consistency issue. This week, I'm working with perhaps the most modern approach to the deck, Danger Rangers. The Danger archetype is pretty splashable, and the Super Quants don't mind being discarded at all. In fact, the discards can actually help get play started. This is probably the most obscure archetype I've used in the tournament so far, so I'll be sure to explain what each of these guys and gals do as I cover them. Let's do the card by card. I run each Super Quant card at 3 copies each. Each of the main cards have an on-summon effect and an on-grave effect. Basically, they do something when they morph into battle and when they revert to their civilian forms. Basically, they're super floaters. The first of these is the leader of the Super Quantum Rangers, Red Layer. He leads the team in battle by acting as a starter for the deck. He's an easier to summon Cyber Dragon. His on-summon effect lets you add another Super Quant from grave to hand, and his on-grave effect lets you revive a Super Quant, but its effects are essentially negated, otherwise it'd be a little strong. You almost always want to see Red Layer in your hand, as he can help you recover well after a board wipe, or by simply getting a body on board for your first turn. Next up is the Tactician for the group, Green Layer. On summon, he lets you summon another Super Quant from hand, allowing it to function as both a starter or an extender, depending on the situation. When sent to grave, he lets you discard a Super Quant in order to draw a new card. This cycling effect is pretty useful, as it can help you dig just a little bit further into your deck, while also triggering another Ranger's on-grave effect. The tech advisor to the group is Blue Layer. She has the best on-summon effect out of the group, as she's a Rhoda for the archetype. You can add any Super Quant card from deck to hand though. Spell, trap, monster, you name it, she's got it. Her on-grave effect is also quite necessary, as she recycles up to 3 Super Quants from grave back into the deck. Since the deck does go through itself at a lightning quick pace, this effect is crucial for making sure that we don't run out of gas in a grind game. I do wish this effect also granted a 1-card draw like with Green Layer, but it is what it is. The last of the Rangers is the super powerful 6th Ranger, White Layer. He focuses on making the Xyz summoning process easier. On summon, you can foolish out another Super Quant from deck in order to change his own attribute and level to whatever you milled out. Besides smoothing over the overlaying process, this can also trigger another Super Quant's on-grave effect. Finally, his on-grave effect allows you to add a Fairy Alphan, either from deck or grave to hand. Speaking of, let's look at this little guy. He seems to be the power source for the Super Quants, and this is reflected in his abilities. He works a bit differently from the other main deck monsters, but he does also have 2 effects. The first makes Xyz summoning easier. By targeting a Super Quant, you can make all monsters on your field the same level as that targeted monster. The second effect is even better, if you can believe that, but it's also a little risky. By tributing himself, you can select 3 different Super Quants from your deck. One is selected randomly to be summoned, and the rest go to the grave. This little guy is quite the starter. Now, although his effect is very good for the strategy, as it has the potential to trigger 3 follow-up effects, it is fragile. What I mean by this is that he has to tribute himself at cost, and the effect isn't quick, and the special summon is partially random. This guy is just begging to get hand trapped, so just be wary of that before blindly shotgunning his effect. The title of this deck is Danger Rangers. We've covered the Rangers, so let's go over the Cryptids. Up first is 3 copies of Nessie. She just came off the semi-limited list, so now's the perfect time to use her. Besides potentially being another body on board, she can help us search for other dangers. The main win condition of this deck involves having lots of discard fodder, so Nessie essentially counts as 2 cards, since she can replace herself with another danger. It just so happens that both Nessie and White Layer are level 7s, so she can end up making it easier to summon the White Zord with her as well. 2 copies of Mothman are good for the same reason, but for the Green Zord, since he's also level 4. Of course, the cycling effect from his discard trigger further ties his connection to Green Layer. The last 2 dangers are the best ones, so of course they're both still on the limited list. Tsuchinoko and Jackalope are great at getting bodies on board, but like with the previous 2 dangers, sharing a level with a Super Quant alleviates the Zord summoning process. In this case, Blue Layer has a couple Cryptid partners to form Grand Pulse. Double Ash, double Belle rounds out our monster lineup. Really, these spots could go to any hand traps, but they're the ones that I foresee relying on the most. Moving on to spells, let's get the super Quantal stuff out of the way. A single copy of Terraforming gets us to our 3 copies of Magnacarrier. This pseudo-Zord is the main way of creating our win condition, as it supercharges our Xyz summoning capabilities. By discarding a card, we can select a super Quant on field. We then Xyz summon the appropriate Mech beast using the ranger on board as the sole material. This effect is not once per turn, so it's great for spamming our Zords in order to get tons of interruptions on board. The second effect is the win condition part. By sending the field to the grave, you can select 3 Mech beasts with different names, either from the field or grave, smush them all together as material in order to summon Great King Magnus, our boss monster. Don't worry, I'll go over what he does later. The last few cards are all extenders in one way or another. Through testing, I found this deck needs as many extenders as it can get, as the only way we're winning is by bringing out the big guns. And the only way to bring out the big guns is by being able to crank out tons of Zords and cram them all together. Like with Nessie, the February 22 ban list saw the unlimiting of Emergency Teleport. E-Tele was long overdue in my opinion, and I'll gladly take the 3rd copy for this deck. The only target for this spell is Blue Layer, but she's the best ranger to summon for free anyways. We shouldn't ever have to worry about running out of targets either, since Blue Layer can easily recycle herself whenever she goes to grave. 1 for 1 gets us easy access to Fairy Alphan. We definitely want to get this little guy onto the field as soon as possible, preferably without burning our normal summon. Just be careful not to pitch a dangerous cost for this card. Since 1 for 1 sends to the grave, it doesn't actually discard. Monster Reborn lets us abuse a ranger's on-summon ability, and Foolish Burial lets us abuse their on-grave effect. The last spell is Reasoning. It is random what cards you get, but since there's a wide range of levels in this deck, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7, the odds of your opponent guessing correctly is slim. Not only that, but even if they do guess correctly, they're most likely going to be hitting a ranger, which means that you'll still at least get to trigger their on-grave effect. Our last 3 cards go to Triple Imperm. This card is just so generically good, and we definitely want to see some interruptions when going second. Alright, that's pretty much it for the main deck. Unfortunately, we still don't have enough power. You know what that means. We need Dinosaur power now! Each of these Zord cards works similarly. They all possess the ability to, once per turn, attach a Super Quant Ranger from field or hand to itself as material. These Zords also cannot attack if they are out of material. Makes sense, the Zords need a pilot. They also possess a unique ability that focuses on interrupting the opponent and controlling the game state. Grand Pulse is our rank 3 Zord whose native pilot is Blue Layer. By detaching a material, we can pop a back row card. One of our rank 4 monsters belongs to Green Layer, Aeroboros. By detaching a material, we can Book of Moon a monster. Magnaliger is Red Layer's Zord. By detaching a material, we can pop a monster. Finally, Lusterrex is White Layer's Zord. By detaching a material, we can target a monster and negate its effects for the turn. What's important to note is that for every single one of these Zords, their effects become quick effects, so long as they have the proper ranger attached to them as material. So, if we can manage to get a couple Zords onto the board at once, we'll have a few forms of interaction during our opponent's turn. But there are 2 more Super Quant based extra deck monsters. Blaster Magna is a Link 3 monster that simply requires 3 different named cards. Being a Link 3, he's a bit pricey to summon, but he can be worth it depending on the situation. While in play, if you Xyz summon a Zord to one of his arrows, of which all 3 point downwards, you get a free draw, helping you to extend your plays. Not only that, but while he's Link summoned, he can't be destroyed by card effects, and with 2500 attack, it's gonna be hard to get over. Finally, his third ability grants your Zords the ability to float. If a Zord dies, you get to summon its appropriate ranger from your deck. This will most likely trigger their on-summon effect as well. Now, when even the power of the Zords isn't enough, it's time to form the Megazord. When we go for Great King Magnus, we want to supply him with as much material as possible. I recommend at least 4, but you can go as high as 6. So here's the rundown. He's a 3600 attack point monster that can float into 3 lesser Zords whenever he's sent to the grave. If he has at least 2 mats, as a quick effect, he can shuffle any card into the deck. Now that is some prime removal. If he has at least 4 mats, he's a Towers, straight up immune to every card effect. He can still be Kaiju'd though, so watch out for that. If he has at least 6 mats, he's like a constant Ash Blossom. Yeah, with this guy on board, it's hard to lose, but he's not completely invincible, so once you summon him, you'll want to be as aggressive as possible to go ahead and end the game. Alright, there's still a few other cards in the extra deck, and they're all surprisingly good. I'm running a Dreadnought Dreadnoid as an alternative way of ranking up into Magnus if we can't get our field spell to stick. But Dreadnoid doesn't just have the ability to rank up into Magnus, we can also easily go into Divine Arsenal. This guy is a house of a card and should always be considered in any Xyz focus deck. The last slot goes to another Link monster, Infinitrack Megaclops. This guy is hard to summon, but is a great follow-up play for if Magnus goes down. Requiring 3 Xyz monsters, he's definitely worth the investment. Rocking a whopping 4000 attack, and the ability to revive your Xyz monsters while attaching an opponent's card to it as material, he's just a game changer. A couple cards I considered running were the Super Dreadnought cards, Lieb, Super Dora, and Gustav Max, but there just wasn't enough room. I mean, I could make room if I cut the smaller Zords down to just 1 copy each, but that's a little too risky. If I accidentally let my Zords get banished and I only have 1 copy of each, then I severely hamper my ability to bring out Magnus at full power. But I'll probably test these guys out in the future and see how they do. Alright, let's finish off the profile with some side deck stuff. Grand Pulse is my only method of dealing with back row unless I really want to waste a mat on Magnus to spin the card. So if we need to deal with more back row heavy decks, I'm running triple 20s. I'm going with Twin Twisters over, say, Cosmic Cyclone because the discard synergizes with both the Super Quants and the Dangers. Triple Tack is for dealing with Dragoon and or sniping out a Kaiju from my opponent's hand. Dark Ruler plus Lightning Storm is there for board breaking. This deck does sometimes struggle with the ability to make plays if my opponent has too many negates. So even if I don't have the resources to pop off fully, just giving myself a breather by clearing a big board can help solidify my position. I love Big Turtle, and I feel he's very important for dealing with otherwise undealable monsters. And finally, Pank can be a free summon going second, is good interruption, and serves as another level 7 monster for making the White Sword. Phew, this profile's getting long, but this is a deck I know really well, so I had a lot to talk about. Although we're not quite done yet, let's quickly go over some basic combos and things to keep in mind while piloting this deck. This deck works well going either first or second, but I prefer to go first, so I can at least set up a Zord or 2 for interruption. Honestly, any Ranger is great to see in your opening hand, but red and green are probably the best. As an example play, let's start with Red Layer. He has no target to search at the moment on summon, but that's okay. We can always save his on-summon effect for later if we have a way to bring out another Red Layer. Afterwards, let's normal the Green Layer, triggering his ability to bring out Blue. Blue then gets the search for the field spell. This could be a first turn Magnus if one of your remaining cards in hand to discard is a floater like Nessie or White Layer. But let's be honest, this is kind of a perfect case situation. Instead, let's do a few practice hands, and I'll go over my thought process behind what I'm doing. Alright, so we have opened a green layer, but unfortunately no other super quants. So he's not really going to get much value off of a summon just yet. We do have E-Telly, which can get us to blue layer, which, assuming the opponent doesn't ash it or something like that, then we can go off from there. So, for example, let's say our opponent doesn't have ash. Yeah, sure, I want to ash my own thing. Alright, let's bring out blue layer. Trigger her effect. Search for, let's say, actually, we can go for either red or white at this point, because again, we haven't normaled. So now our green effect can go live if we want to go for a ranger. Or we can go for the field spell, discard Nessie to get Grand Pulse on board, and that'll put another danger in hand. But honestly, that's about all we'd be able to do. So yeah, I think in this particular case, let's go for red layer. So next we will normal the green. Bring out the red, and at this point, we don't have the field spell, so we can't really go into any of our Zords, because none of our Rangers are at the same level. So in a situation like this, I probably would go ahead and turn all these guys into Blaster Magna. That way I at least get to go ahead and trigger some of their on-grave effects. For example, I can trigger red to revive, let's say, blue, and then go ahead and trigger all these guys in sequence. Now, most of these effects don't really matter too much in which order you go for, but occasionally you'll need to watch the chain linking to make sure you don't miss the timing off of a particular summon. So blue layer's effect, I'm going to shuffle everything back except blue, since obviously blue is being revived right now. Alright, I suppose in this situation I would go and fire off a Nessie, just to see if I can get something here. Don't really need the body on board too much. That's funny, I drew into an ash. But you might say that would be a bit of a misplay. It might have been better to just keep the ash in hand, that way I have some sort of interruption. Because again, with this particular hand, I actually wasn't able to end on any of my main Zords, so my opponent would not have any interruption going first. But that's about all this first turn was really capable of doing, and honestly, I don't really have much of a follow-up at this point either. My hand is nothing but hand traps. So let's go ahead and restart this and see what another test hand looks like. I'll probably do like 2 or 3 of these in total just to give you a good idea of what you might expect to see. But alright, as a turn 1 hand, this is actually looking much better. Even if I'm going first or second. So say I'm going first, I can still go ahead and drop red layer for free. Again, he does not able to trigger his on-summon effect, but that's okay. Now we can follow up with a green layer. His normal summon will allow us to bring out another super quant. Let's go for the Alphan and shotgun his effect. Now again, with all this demonstration, I'm assuming my opponent has no interruptions. Big things you'll just want to watch out for is if they try to ash like Fairy Alphan or Imperm on his summon, stuff like that. But in this particular instance, okay, so Alphan has the ability to bring out 3 different named Rangers. We've already used the on-summon ability of green, so I actually don't want to choose a green here in case it is tagged for the summon. Let's go for a red, because even though we've already brought out red this turn, he was not able to trigger his effect. So if red layer gets summoned off of Fairy Alphan, his effect will be live. So I'll go for red, I'll go for a white, and I'll go for a blue. Yep, confirm the 3 cards. I'll just select one at random, and let's say we hit the red. Alright, so we'll summon the red, send the other 2 to grave. Alright, so now red will go ahead and trigger, allowing us to add, let's say, the white layer back to hand. We will trigger white layer, grab a Fairy Alphan from a deck, and blue will go ahead and recycle anything else we're not using. So basically, I'll just cycle itself. I like leaving the Fairy Alphans in the grave, that way they're not there clogging the deck, because white layer can retrieve them from anywhere, basically. And pull that. Go ahead and add that back to hand. Alright, now, we are able to go into one Zord, which would be Magnaliger, or we can go into Blaster Magna. If we did that, we would definitely need the ability to try and follow up with another Zord. And is that possible? White layer can still be summoned, because I don't just have to get rid of a super quant in hand, I can get rid of one from off the field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pitch the green layer here. I'll bring White Layer out, and this will help me trigger some effects. I'm going to go ahead and trigger the Green Layer, pitching another White Layer for cost, and then I'll use White Layer's effect as Chain Link 2. I probably should have did that as Chain Link 1. That way I could resolve, say, this Red Layer here. Yeah, actually that would have worked out better. Oh, actually, you know what? It triggered for some reason anyways. That's interesting. It's probably because it's a mandatory effect, actually. Well, I am going to bring back another monster. Alright, now, Tsuchinoko is a free body no matter what, whether my opponent hits the discard or not. So let us go ahead and bring them out. And let's try and go for... Oh, yes, I like to see that. Alright, let's go for a Blaster Magna. Let's use the White Layer who can't use his effects. Let's use the Tsuchinoko, who's essentially dead to us. And we'll go ahead and use... a white or a Red Layer. We'll follow this up with an E-Tele to get a Blue Layer on board. Blue Layer will grant us a summon or a search for our field. Now, since White Layer sent a red off of his effect, he's basically treated as level 5, meaning we can go into Magnaliger. This will trigger a draw off of the Blaster Magna, because we exceed summon to a zone it points to. We can then go ahead and activate the field, use its effect to turn one of our hand traps, whichever one we don't think we're going to need. Ash is probably a little more versatile, so I'll pitch the Ghost Belle, turn blue into a Gram Pulse, which will get us another draw. And we hit a Nessie. Nice. If only I had one more Super Quant on board, I would have been able to use the Magnacarrier to pitch the Nessie, turn that into another Zord. Magna would have gotten us another draw, Nessie would have gotten a search, and then we would have had 3 Xyz monsters on board for the field. But alas, it is what it is. Overall, this board actually isn't that bad. It was looking pretty rough there for a minute, and I had to kind of cut away a little bit to kind of think about what it was I had to do. But I think this is probably the best board that I would have been able to end on. Magnaliger is a monster pop, Grand Pulse is a spell pop, Blaster Magna turns any of my Zords into floaters, plus of course if any of my Zords are taken down, the fact that these Rangers are material means that once they're sent to the grave, they're going to trigger their effects. So like a Red Layer is going to bring back another Super Quant, Blue's going to recycle some resources, and White's going to get more discard fodder in the form of Alphan. So I'm in a pretty good position even if my opponent is able to break my board for at least a good follow-up play. But yeah, so I think that's about all I'm going to do. I'll leave the rest of the deck for its true performance in the actual duel against Demurer Tundra, so definitely stay tuned for that. I've got a power and a force that you've never seen before. Although, after this explanation, you should know the Super Quant's a bit better. I actually plan on making another deck profile on these guys in the near future with a slightly different build, but for now, this is the version that I'm taking to my battle with Demurer Tundra. Nick, I hope you bring your A game because the power is protecting me always. And until next time, everyone, have a blessed day.